Brinkley Secretary Brinkley for coming. I really do appreciate you.
I get called lots of things.
Old habits die hard.
Thank you for coming.
Some of them are publishable. So.
And to be here to listen to some requests we have for additional funding from the state. I know you received a letter, but we're going to go down the items in the letter. We have some people here that will speak about them and try to give you some more background information on it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask Commissioner Howard. Feel free to ask anybody about that. All right, first thing we have in the letter is the. Go ahead.
Can we, before we do that, I know you have something, Doug.
Yeah.
And I think, and you probably already know this, Mr. Secretary, but we just want to brag a little bit with the fact that we now have a AAA rating across the board here in Carroll.
Good.
We just achieved that at our last trip to New York a month ago, and we've been working on that for quite some time. And we're happy to report that we now are AAA across the board, and it's because of a myriad of things that we are doing here. You know that. This was your stomping ground.
Believe me, I'm
So,
well aware of it.
You know, number one in light manufacturing jobs and new companies coming here, highest graduation rate, safest county, highest quality of life, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I wanted you to know that.
Good.
Because we're very proud of that. And
And a lot of people don't understand the importance behind it, and certainly you all do, but for any who might be listening, the key is it keeps the cost of borrowing as inexpensive as possible, which means a couple things. Number one, you don't have to put out as much to pay back your debt service, or when you do have to borrow something, you get the cheapest rate for whatever timeline you're doing that. And the state has AAA ratings across the board. We like to see when the counties can also do the same. And it's just, but it's also a marker of sound financial management, which is key, but also potential. They recognize that you have the tax base with the potential to certainly satisfy the bondholders. A lot of people think, well, I got a AAA bond rating. Well, the essence, and I heard this from the, I guess, the Cato Institute, and they said all it is the ability and the willingness to be able to satisfy the bondholders, because those are the ones who pay attention to what it is, and therefore they're willing to give you the lowest rating possible, because they feel secure. So, congratulations. That's good to hear.
and I would be remiss if I didn't thank the best director of management budget in the state of Maryland.
Is he here too?
Second.
See, I got to do that. I got to do that at the county level.
Oh, at the county level. Okay, now
Mr. Secretary.
now that you qualified that.
The sad thing is we rehearsed this. It went very differently than that, yeah. So do you want the rest of the letter, or should we just wrap it in?
Ted, red and white, beautiful colors there. He's blushing, tremendously.
That's right. So in conclusion, yeah, that's
So
right.
thank you very much for coming today, and blah, blah, blah. I know, Doug, you have something. You want to do that before we?
Sure, yeah, just real quick. First of all, Secretary Winkler, I appreciate you being here. It's hard to believe, we're at the end of our 8 years. We're term limited now, so I have all of 2 sessions left after this one. And I know they're very excited about this. So very happy to have you out here. We know yesterday that the governor, in a meeting with the Secretary of Labor and Secretary of Veteran Services, declared, with the Lieutenant Governor as well, November to be Hire a Veteran Month. Anne Arundel County followed suit. We have a proclamation to do that as well, to declare it Hire a Veteran Month in Carroll County as well. Over the past couple of years, we've really tried to ramp up our veterans services with a free shuttle down to the veterans hospitals, service offices that have helped us get about $10 million worth of benefits that have been lost for Carroll County residents, and certainly wanted to support the governor's effort in getting veterans hired. So we get the last signature on it, but we'd like to send that back with you, and we think it's a very good message for folks to have. We appreciate the government taking
It's
the
very
lead on
key, and while it might appear small in the eyes of some people, to thank the individuals who, while they didn't lose their life in the process, they certainly put their life on the line for all of our freedoms and all of our safety, and that is certainly key, and something that I think we owe all of them and their families, actually, because the families, it's also in the public safety aspect where people, they go out the door and sometimes you pray that they come back. Sometimes you don't know that they'll come back, and the family's the same. So we certainly are very cognizant of what the veterans have done for us, and now it's time for us also to open up any opportunities we can for them. Thank you.
Okay.
You gonna-
Okay.
We got one more signature to get on.
Yeah, we'll get one more signature. and-
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're good to go.
And you know everybody, Dave, right? Have you met,
Haven't met you.
Mike Fowler, I'm legislative liaison for the commission.
Mike, it's good to meet you.
Pleasure.
Good to meet you.
we're very lucky to have him as well.
Done a great job
Mike
for
was,
us.
in the same role with BGE, and, we lobbied him heavily to come to Carroll.
Good.
So
Good.
he's done did a great job for us last year, and now he's got his feet on the ground. Look forward to it.
Carroll's a great area, you know it, you represent it, and I represented it for many years, 8 years, 12 years, I guess. And driving up 27 coming here, it was just, fantastic. 'Cause I live in Mount Airy, I just bought a house in Mount Airy.
Oh, you did?
Yep.
Good for you.
So,
It's
I
not
have the-
District 1, but good for you.
I have the train tunnel going through my backyard.
Frederick County.
Yeah, so I'm 100 yards inside the Frederick County side.
Oh, okay.
But you all have all the permits. Since it's in the corporate limits of Mount Airy. And the corporate limit boundary is about 150 feet behind the house. So, but it's great. You have to go into Frederick County, or Carroll County to get into my Frederick County street, and I'm 500 yards from Montgomery and Howard County, and I'm 60 seconds from the highway. So I can be in Western Maryland or Baltimore or Annapolis. And it's great.
Beautiful.
Good for you.
Sounds good.
Congrats.
Thank you.
Commissioner, will you have anything?
No, we were talking earlier, I just wanted to welcome you here to Carroll County, and, it's the closest thing to heaven I think you can find, so,
It's great. It's great. And you're high enough. We're not close to it. So.
we'll try not to,
And I want to acknowledge the delegation that's here too. They work very hard in Annapolis, and the governor certainly turns to them quite a bit. We have communications as needed on issues that come about. I know that I talk to Susan quite a bit when it comes to the pension issues. She reaches out to me a lot. I'm the governor's appointee on the pension board, so the Board of Pension the trustees of the pension board. And so I just want to acknowledge their presence and the work that they do too. So
Good.
I know all of them will be happy when Tuesday's passed. So.
That is for sure.
Senator Reedy with us,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I guess with that, we can get started. Our first thing on our list is the drug enforcement treatment. It's for public safety. When this board first got into office, we put, I think it was $2 million aside for non-Carroll initiative for opioids and so forth, to try to keep drug dealers out of Carroll County in different ways in which to do that. Since that time, we've put more money into it, as you can see through this thing, through the paragraph that we have here. We have ongoing money of $800,000. In FY17, Carroll County increased its funding to drug treatment by $125,000. FY18 increased by another $75,000 to $200,000. Is increasing $75,000 each year until we get to $500,000 by FY22. What we're asking for is some matching funds to help us with this problem. It's a terrible problem all around the state of Maryland and Carroll County and everywhere. It's not just Maryland, it's throughout the entire country. Anything that we could get additionally from the state to help us fight this battle would be greatly appreciated. I don't know if anybody else has anything they'd like to say about that one, but.
I would say that, we just put another $300,000 into pilot projects. We feel like we really need to generate some unique thinking on some of this stuff, some of the stuff that maybe doesn't always come to the forefront when people are going for grant funding. But, I think right now we're realizing we took the first effort was really on law enforcement. It's like, if you're looking, and the reason we call it not Carroll, it's like if you're looking for an easy place to sell your drugs, it's not Carroll, it's not here. But then we also know that education and treatment have got to be the other two sides of the coin. And so we've really, over the last 2 years, kind of balanced out that picture as well. But I think we consider it probably our biggest long-term threat, really, of anything that we're facing as a community, as a county.
Well, it affects everything, as you know. I mean, 75% of all crime anywhere is either directly or indirectly attributed to drug use and abuse. And if we could, find a way to cut this down, and we have to, like Commissioner Howard said, out-of-the-box solutions. People are doing the same thing over and over again. aren't making any headway. So that's why I put some additional funding in this, because you might not be able to get a grant for this program or that program, but it might help. So let's put some funding into it ourselves and see what we can come up with it. So we can get some, additional funding from the state to help with those efforts. That would be really appreciated.
All right. I know the governor committed $10 million 2 years ago when we put in the budget. Legislature at the conference table when we were dealing with the budget made what I perceived as disparaging comments about it, but we were able to work through it. Clay Stamp, I'm certain Clay's been up here to try to help with this, and even in other conversations, this has become such a rampant malignancy on our communities that we're open to trying anything that's new. The governor declared a state of emergency. Every month I get an email renewing that state of emergency. Finally, other jurisdictions are following suit, but we're still trying to navigate our way through this maze. And for anybody to deny that it's a big problem, first off, they're fooling themselves, because every family in one way, shape, or form has been touched by it. And so I know that the governor's committed to it, but exactly what the solution is, we're still looking for that Achilles heel to that malignancy. And I'd like to think that all communities are looking for that, and as we discover things that work, we'll be able to share them back. But we'll make sure that it's communicated.
And education is a major factor. We approved some money yesterday to go back down to 6th grade level to start educating students about drugs and opioids and all the other issues going on. They're also intertwined, but we're trying to go through education so the next, as they come through, this whole issue hopefully one day will go away.
Well,
or diminish.
that certainly is a perfection. And as a business coach, I had said, you strive for progress because you'll never reach perfection. But as we can learn what we get through, then we can apply it and just continually strive for that. So, good.
Yeah, all right. Thank you. Next thing we have improvements to Public Safety Training Center. Commissioner Weiss, is it yours?
I'll take that one. We're already realizing some funding from the state for this project. Mr. Secretary, I'm sure you're well aware of that. And we're quite proud of what we have accomplished there so far. As a matter of fact, the governor visited our Public Safety Training Center when he was here during the Carroll County Day, I believe, and was very impressed with the progress that we've made. We actually took an old farm out there on Washington Road that scooted between Westminster High and Robert Moton Elementary, right in that corridor, and have made it into a state-of-the-art facility. We've got a couple phases to go yet with that, and we've got some of those funds set aside, thanks to you, in order to do that. I think what we're looking for, if the possibility exists, to push some of that funding up so that we can realize the completion prior to what we had anticipated. So it's just a food for thought type of deal. We certainly do appreciate what you've done for us so far. We're making great progress out there. But the request was, if we could scoot that up a little bit, that would be nice.
Okay, good.
So it's a wish list type of thing.
I understand, and we have a couple requests for programs through the state to be accelerated in our timeline. For those who don't know, when we do the operating budget, we certainly do the operating budget 1 year at a time, as you do. When we do the capital budget, we have a 5-year plan because it typically might take 3 years for us to, by the time we get shovel in the ground, by the time there's completion with equipment and everything else. And so we have quite a few requests to accelerate some other programs. We have a significant challenge when it comes to our capital budget still. We are still in our operating fund. As recently as 2013, the tax base was sufficient to satisfy our tax obligations, to satisfy the bond holders, which is the dedicated purpose of all that. It goes into the annuity bond fund. And when your citizens see the 11 cents on their tax bill that goes to the state of Maryland, that's its sole purpose. It's dedicated solely to satisfy those bonds. And as I say, and I think in 2012, 2013, there was sufficient assessable base and therefore revenue to satisfy those. As we are fulfilling our obligation to the bondholders since then, we have had to supplement that payback from the general fund. We anticipate in the upcoming budget that that number will be about $420 million, might be 450. Now there's $450 million we could have put elsewhere in some other very worthwhile projects. And that's a significant management issue that we have. The governor's strategy, and I think has been successful, has been to cap our capital debt just below $1 billion every year. We are allowing the assessments to catch up to that obligation. And while we haven't hit that plateau, we do foresee the plateau in the next couple of years that we can actually get ahead of the curve. But I hear you, I understand it, and particularly when it comes to the volunteer fire and rescue personnel, we understand that, you know, training is the best prevention that there is from their point of view, and they have to have the tools to do that so that they can understand what it's like. I was a volunteer firefighter in Newmarket, got my 30-year pin 4 or 5 years ago, and there's nothing like, you know, having a mask on and you're in the air tank and everything's dark, and when you open up the line, to feel that steam just come down and just fill the room, and they have to know what to do under those circumstances, and I get that facility is to help with that.
So you're a little younger than me. I got my 42-year pin.
Yeah.
Last year. But I'm spot on with you there, and I will reiterate the fact that we are completely volunteer here as far as fire goes. So we look at the training center as one of the tools for recruitment and retention as well, because when you've got a state-of-the-art facility like that, that's a huge attraction for folks that are thinking about perhaps running into a building while everybody else is running out. So that's a huge factor for us as well.
And I can tell you, because there's a Carroll County nexus to this recent policy decision that we made, though thankfully you haven't had to utilize it. But I had breakfast with Doug Alexander down in Mount Airy, and in his capacity with the Maryland State Firemen's Association requested that we include an increase in the death benefit to anyone who passes in the line of duty in the state budget. I offered it to the governor, and he said do it. And so we've increased that as a result of a request that came here, because we certainly need to make sure that, you know, if someone does pay the sacrifice, that the family can be helped out as best as possible.
That's tremendous. So
Great.
we truly do appreciate that. Always,
Good.
So thank you. Okay.
All right, let's move on to public safety portable and mobile radios. I believe Scott has that.
I need to put my glasses on.
Quite a system we got going down there, yeah.
Mr. Secretary, Scott Campbell, Director of Public Safety for Carroll County. First, that may be the first I heard about your personal fire rescue service background, and I personally thank you for that. And I've spent 30 years in the Frederick County system before I relocated, so I can
Where were
truly
you,
appreciate
Frederick?
Walkersville, even past chief there.
Station 11 with Paul Stahl.
Yes, sir. And I will say very happily that I had the pleasure of being active in the department when Paul Stahl was an active member of the
In fact,
department.
one of my, I can't say first call, it's just, I just never remember, I'll never forget, because they had the 30-year write-up on it a couple years ago when that military plane crashed.
Yes, sir. I had the unfortunate pleasure, if you want to call it that.
I'm sure you were
of serving
there.
that. Yes, sir.
I ran back up for Station 17. We just did a fill-in with our
Yes, sir.
ambulance when that happened. But and for those that are familiar with how it goes, I had just bought a car that day, and I was scraping the window sticker off of it. 1981 Toyota Tercel. Didn't even have a radio in the darn thing, and it was raining.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing this rumble like thunder to the
Exactly.
north and the west. And I thought that maybe it was the Concorde taking off. It sounded like, you know, one of the, because it didn't stop. It just kept rumbling. And then when the pager went off, I had never heard that many alert tones to go off. And I kept waiting, what's the call? I mean, you got all these tones going. And then to hear an aircraft down, off Devil Bridge Road. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you. And you're giving me chills because I'm reliving exactly what you're saying. Length of tones, pagers going off, sirens blowing, and
No one knew.
you're standing there waiting till for it to end so you figure out what are we
Right.
alerting for.
Thought it was a barn fire or something.
Yes, absolutely.
And it wasn't, an aircraft down. For those that are listening, was it about 22, 27 people were on that plane?
I believe it was 21. 16 were, I believe 16 were found. We found above ground, and 5, unfortunately, were,
Yeah.
if you want to say, entombed with a cockpit that was
Yeah.
when it hit, and had to be entombed
It was in
with
May
a
of
piece of equipment.
1981. 'Cause I was
Yes,
about
sir.
to graduate from
You are on
College
it.
Park.
Yep.
Yeah,
PC
so-
135.
Yep, yep.
Yes, sir. So, thank
Okay,
you.
now we got that out of the way.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You want to talk about the Blue Fire engines or anything, or just let that go?
Well, let that go. So, we always use Mount Airy Squad to run rescue. Now I know Newmarket has a squad, and you are about to get
There
down
you go. All right, Mr. Secretary, hopefully this is a fairly straightforward request. This involves with the proposed purchase of 993. They're known as subscribers in general, but mobile and portable radios specifically and only for public safety. No other radio users. This is for law enforcement, fire rescue, and EMS. The radios they currently have are older devices. They're X series, if I may just use that to be able to make the difference. What we're proposing is to upgrade them to the APX, the Apex, which is the state-of-the-art. And that's the exact same version or generation of subscriber that the state of Maryland has used. I believe approximately 7 years ago, they had a very, very large order of the what's called an Apex 7000. This will be a very close device to that. It would be the same Apex line, but a different version. We're able to use a slightly less sophisticated device for our communications needs. The beauty would be we currently have limited interoperability with the Maryland First because of the foresight of the folks who designed and laid it out to have some talk groups so folks like Carroll County can interoperable communicate with them. If we upgrade to APX or Apex radios, that restriction limitation goes away, and we get 100% unlimited and/or seamless interoperability. That's across the board. Our public service users already have that. Unfortunately, our public safety folks, even though they have interoperability, it's limited to that state-provided, mutually interoperable talk groups. There is nothing physically wrong with the radios that our fire rescue service and law enforcement folks are using. However, they are older. As a matter of fact, they're Motorola product. There's no denying they're Motorola Solutions product. Motorola's the way they support their product is 5 years after they announce they no longer manufacture a given item, they guarantee the buyer 5 years of support. That support for our portable radios ends at the end of this calendar year. And that doesn't mean we can't maintain these radios. It just becomes much, much more difficult to. We're no longer assured parts availability. We're no longer assured immediate turnaround because that 5-year window has ended. So we go from a very easily supported to a much more difficult support effort for these radios. The APX radio, we go to that, change that completely. Parts are readily available. They're still manufactured. They can still be purchased off the shelf. And everyone who is Motorola certified will service them very quickly. So it truly is a public safety-based request. I do want to share that Carroll County is definitely approaching this, or dealing with this, but the fact is we simply cannot approach this as a lump sum purchase. We're talking about a $4 million purchase, so our approach currently is to set aside funding over 5 or 6 fiscal years to buy these radios incrementally. If we can do this all at one time, we do not have to try to decide who gets and who waits. We achieve countywide interoperability immediately. And as I said, it will allow us to become fully interoperable and compliant with the Maryland First Initiative, one of the state's
So you'll be on the state
quality.
system. I think we
Well,
put
sir-
$400 million into that whole system.
It was, sir, that we, Carroll County, and I must say, later in another item I believe I'll be speaking to, May of 15, we turned on, if you will, placed in service a brand-new digital radio system. Now, the radios we currently have can operate obviously on those, and these Apex can as well, but in a much more efficient way. FDMA and TDMA, if I can just say, it's like beta and VHF, just two different ways of doing the same thing, if you will. But we have our own radio infrastructure. We will continue to use it as our primary, but what this would allow is for the state assets to switch and operate on our system seamlessly, and we can do the exact same.
It's connected anyway to the AT&T deal with, because there was some back and forth on whether they should choose to go with AT&T, and I think that was a default.
And I believe you're referring to AT&T as the selected vendor for FirstNet?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Well, that's a national broadband initiative. It's related, but they are two separate items. We are actually making that same evaluation this time as what's in our best interest. I'll be the first to tell you that it's a great learning process. You know what you first hear, and then when you actually talk to the people, it's amazing how different it is.
Back, you know.
Yeah. And how
Tears
it's
flow.
also amazing how people refer to one another and their assets and capabilities. So in a nutshell, Mr. Secretary, the request is for a $4 million in funding to buy these radios for public safety for the reasons I've shared. Again, the county is approaching it, but unfortunately with the limitations we have, it's going to take a much, much longer time for us to do it with our own resources. So with that, I thank you.
Good.
And should I remain, Mr.
You got the next one.
Okay. The next item. As you heard me say, that a few years ago, we completed the transition of our county radio system to a state-of-the-art digital platform. And what we realized when we did so was that there is one very, very small but legitimate area in the county, the very extreme southeast corner of the county, that does have some questionable radio coverage. It's not that radio signal coverage doesn't exist, it's just less than the design parameters of our new radio system. Now, the radio system design met our contractual obligations. It's just unfortunate that what very, very few pieces of the county that don't have that design criteria are amassed in that one little tiny part of the county. It's the Henryton Road, Marriottsville Road area, the very southeast corner. Very rural area, but also very heavily traveled as far as a commuter route. It's like a back way into western Baltimore County and northern Howard. So there is a lot of traffic down there, but there's not a lot of growth, built up growth. It's also, I believe, the area has an equestrian horse and some recreational. So even though there may not be a lot of calls, often it's a very rural setting, an extended advanced technical rescue operation where, as I'm sure you can appreciate, communications is critical. Unfortunately, it's that one little pinhead area to where we don't have the assurances we have throughout the rest of the county. So specifically, we spoke with our colleagues with Motorola Solutions. As you can imagine, communications, there's no inexpensive solution to it, but we were very fortunate to find that the Alpha Ridge Tower, I believe it's an asset of Howard County, it's right at their training center. It is the perfect location, and the Motorola engineers have shown that if we can add that to our system, our network, that we can light up, if you will, that area and achieve actually even better coverage than would have been, say, in other parts of Carroll by making that improvement. The one thing I'd like to note, unfortunately, I don't know outside of Carroll what the state's Maryland First efforts might involve. So I would have to think that it might be an opportunity for the state and the county to work together. And maybe there are some shared improvements there to where we could both benefit from adding that location, but not have to duplicate efforts like fixed generators, shelters. I know fiber exists in the area to eliminate the need for expensive microwave links. So it's a very promising location, but again, fiscally challenging. The fixed quote I have at the time was less than what I'm stating today, but it was $700 and some thousand. I noted an $800,000 ask for Carroll County to be able to add or improve that site. And the only reason it's that number, it would be significantly more, is because there is a significant amount of existing infrastructure that we have access to that Howard County is offering, being on the tower, using their generator, their equipment shelter, the existence of fiber, things that otherwise we'd have to invest in.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes perfect sense.
Okay. Thank you, sir. What, do I have one more?
Wait, there's more.
Yes, but wait. And my last item. This is a bit of an odd ask in that it's the cost to maintain the system that I just spoke to, but I think in a very proactive way. When Carroll County made the decision to go to this new digital radio system, it made a concurrent decision to support it in a very proactive way to maintain it as a current, up-to-date radio system. I love the term that it was used from a past colleague with Motorola Solutions, but by maintaining our system current on an ongoing basis, it eliminates a forklift upgrade over time, which is, as you can imagine, very expensive. the county spent $14.5 million upgrading its radio system, and that was reusing the 8 sites that we were already on and only added 3 sites. So there are far greater, more expansive upgrades out there. We were very blessed that we were able to do ours as cost effectively as we could. But there is a cost to maintain it in a current status and make sure that the radio system stays current in technology and hardware. This year is year 3 of the 3-year period since that system went in service, and the cost to maintain our radio system and all the associated systems, our communication network, is this year it's $1,370,000. I demonstrate that because in order to maintain the radio system in a current state so that it doesn't fall behind. It's like buying a car, and as time goes on, that car doesn't get any newer. It is what it is. Fortunately, with this setup, we're able to keep that vehicle, that asset, current with new technology and a regularly scheduled upgrade of some of the hardware. So I say that because the upgrade is something that we strongly support. The cost is only going to get more. So we're asking to see if there's a chance that the state might be able to assist us in maintaining this critically important asset.
So when you have here the cost is 1.37.
Yes, sir.
That's the overall cost of the project. It's not necessarily the ask of the state, because you obviously have to plan to put some into it too. But you're looking for just some assistance along the line.
Yes, sir. Specifically, sir, the 1.37 is the cost of the annual maintenance and support. The radio system, the actual build, that was $14.5 million, and that was satisfied with 100% county funding. So this is the ongoing to maintain. The 1.37 million does include some annual support and maintenance of the system, and approximately $500,000 of that would be the cost to do the automatic upgrade. And we'll be more than happy to provide that clarification for you.
All right.
Okay?
When I go back, I'll find out and talk to my analyst who handles public safety,
Sure.
military, fire and rescue,
Understood.
so on and so forth, to see what channels are potentially there. So they're very creative in being able to find other sources of financing, which we strongly encourage.
I
There's
understand.
federal money laying underneath the table somewhere. Let's scarf it up. I don't know that it's there, but they've been very keen on
Absolutely.
identifying assistance like that.
Mr. Secretary, let me just mention on the one about the signal strength and enhancement. That location down Henderson Road is where we have an approved project there to build a new juvenile facility
Yeah.
for girls.
The wax.
And it seems like it would be pretty critical to have that fill in, so it's possible that you could somehow marry that to the project, since that is.
Yeah, unfortunately, that project's been delayed by 3 years. It's freed up, we've talked about our 5-year capital project, and that one's been delayed. And it's becoming increasingly critical, because the facility that we have to house female juveniles is critically abysmal. And something's got to give, and if that one doesn't move forward, my office internally is talking seriously about finding some other site to just renovate and get up and going, because it's just, and I don't get why the rights of ways are taking the time that they are. And it's all about water and sewer right of ways, is what the holdup is. And I think we've planned on about $28 million for the project.
Well, the Chelmsford Power Center was there prior, so we had
Yeah.
a facility there before.
So, we shall see.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Chuck.
Do you simulcast on 3394, is it, or?
We no longer. I'm sure you appreciate this. It became fiscally difficult to be able to continue doing that. The aged low band. We did for as long, and the agreement that we had was that we would do it as long as it was financially wise to do so, but we weren't going to throw good money after bad to do it. And unfortunately, a day came and went, so we no longer simulcast.
We have that with the state police, where we still have to maintain a 39 megahertz system for them, and yet Motorola says, not only do we not make it, we haven't made it for decades now. And so you'll see increasingly state cars now with the new 700 megahertz, but still an old 39 antenna, just in case they're out in those areas that have yet to be reached. And by the time we get the whole state saturated electronically like it needs to be, it'll be time to upgrade everything that we said the first time.
It's a legitimate concern.
Yeah, just like these cell phones. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move on to improvements for clean water. I think Jeff Gasaway has that.
Made sure I picked the right Jeff.
Okay,
Let's look at the next name tag down, so we're.
There we go. Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for your time today. Thanks for visiting here in Carroll County. I'm Jeff Castingway, Director of Public Works here at Carroll County. I want to talk to you real quick about two projects, but first one will be Hampstead Wastewater Treatment Plant. We're asking for some assistance with under the state's direction from MDE. We had to move forward with a second outfall for our wastewater treatment plant in Hampstead.
If I'm not mistaken, that's on the ridge, and you have to flow onto the Baltimore County side and also on this side, is that right?
Yes, right.
So-
That's correct. Now we're going to be, our second outfall is going to be going now to Deep Run, which will then go into Liberty Reservoir.
Okay.
So, as you know, through the history, we've had, over 20 years between litigation, between Piney Run Association, Gunpowder River Keepers, Trouts Unlimited, and then we've been just, numerous studies that we've had to perform over the years. The latest, this current administration has been very helpful. It has really helped this project move forward, especially with some of the staff currently now at MDE in their positions have been very helpful, and we appreciate that. This project now, to run the second outfall in order to meet these new needs for the new permit, we have here about $1.5 million. Current costs are running between $1.5 and $2 million. And we'd like to ask for a little bit of assistance. I mean, MDE's been, again, everything we've had to do with over the years with, we're going through the ENR upgrade. We finally got to, actually yesterday was the actual first day of construction of that project. So the clock started ticking to get that upgrade of that facility. But this project, this has to be completed, and this is part of the ENR upgrade and part of our permit to have this in place by the time we meet ENR for that facility. So again, we're asking if there's any assistance that this, that the state can provide. We appreciate.
Are they financing any of it?
Not the effluent line.
Okay.
The state's taking care of only ENR.
It seems to me I brought this up either last year, 2 years ago. Last time I think we had this conversation was about 2.5 years ago.
Yep.
I honestly don't remember how that went. Obviously, it didn't get satisfied. But I thought that one of the conversations was about their financing, because when they start mandating, as they did in New Windsor when I was there representing New Windsor, they had no plans for any growth. They just had to spend a couple $1 million to upgrade the darn thing, and then the water bills went through the roof.
Right.
And then we had a similar item in Boonesboro in Washington County. So I just don't recall if there was financing identified at low or no interest rate, or what you're seeking is a grant. Is that right?
Yes.
What's the county putting into it, or what's the
Right, for the
I presume you have a special fund that's
Yeah, for the
funding all this.
effluent line right now, it is, again, it's a $1.5 to $2 million project at this time. So we'll have to bond that or fund that within just 100% county funds. The project, the ENR upgrade within the fence line, that's about 51% covered. But again, since this isn't by MDE standards, not to do with nitrogen and phosphorus, since it doesn't directly meet that, there's been zero funds. We did ask MDE for some funding, some assistance with it, again, because it was their direction. We did not, we had no response back on that request.
I'll follow up with the secretary.
Great, thank you very much, appreciate that. The next line item is the sewer pump station. Over at our maintenance facility for the county, we have, the current facility is down gradient from a gravity, right out within the city limits, but just downgrade of the next gravity line. So we know, in other words, for us to connect into it, we'd have to pump up to it. Right now, the county has a current septic system that was installed in 1982, so it's in excess of 36 years old. And we also have on the site a couple car wash tanks. So everything we have down there has to be pumped out on a regular basis, every one of our tanks. And there's also some plans to expand that facility in the future in order to meet the needs and expansion that we do have within our roads, facilities, and fleet. But again, we're stuck by the amount of size of land that we do have available, along with the septic system. What we'd like to do is, by connecting and having a pump station and being able to connect into the City of Westminster sewer system, This would allow this property, the car washes, another one of our buildings, which is our transit system facility, and then also the property that's also adjacent and actually part of the airport, and allow them to better be able to sell that land and put some new development that would be in line with airport activities. And where that property is, that would actually go gravity down to the pump station for us to pump it back up. So we have the enhancement here of 3 properties that we can, 2 properties we can currently take off septic system, and a 3rd property that then would not have to go on to septic systems. Again, that's better for the environment. I know that's always an initiative of Maryland Department of the Environment and Health Department to ideally get people off septic systems and get them into you know, ENR facilities whenever possible, and this is one of those opportunities. So what we do is we're asking the state for some assistance. This is a $2.8 million project to install a pump station in Forest Main Line, and we'd like to ask, you know, the state for some assistance on that project, as we are going to be getting, you know, again, for the, it'll help with nutrients to the ground.
Two-prong aspect to it. One is the environmental issue for the existing facility. But
Yes.
then what I also thought I heard in there was an opportunity for expansion for, or not expansion of it, but to allow further industrial, commercial, or economic opportunities out of the airport.
That is correct.
Okay. So there might be a conversation to have there with Commerce, Department of the Environment. I just, you know, want to see where that goes and what your timeline is on that.
Right.
Is the lack of that holding up some prospects that you had out at the airport?
Since we have about over 13 acres that's available for sale, and the industry has to have something to do with the airport industry. We do not have any current prospects, but again, when you sit back with, you know, you have 13 acres and you're trying to put some type of industrial facility on the site, the cost of putting their own pump station in is counterproductive to the site. And then if you have to just go septic system at that time, again, that'll take up a lot of land. So this would just increase the marketability of that property.
Is Goodwill out, who's out there? I toured somebody that had some, is it Goodwill?
FR Conversions, Kenora Brake, there's a number of, they're across the street from Strauss.
But this was like the Ark.
Oh, the Ark's out there, right?
Yeah,
Right.
the Ark, and so, yeah.
They're
is
before
that-
the airport, but yeah.
All right, but they're out in that area. I didn't know,
Right.
now, do they have sewer access, or are they on a septic system?
They have sewer, but yeah, this land that we have is on the back side of the airport, closest to the maintenance facility,
Okay.
and where the property actually slopes, it actually slopes down more toward the maintenance facility in Old Meadow Branch Road.
Okay.
That's why it makes gravity very difficult to get to the current system of the
It doesn't
industrial
flow
park.
uphill.
We try, but.
That's what a friend of mine from high school, he said, you know, hot on the left, cold on the right, payday Friday, and it all goes downhill. So,
Yep.
But, yeah, I remember getting some money for the Ark a few years ago to help them with
Right.
a big project.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, anything you could do would be greatly appreciated again, and it helps with the initiative to get people off septic systems, including, and it would help us a lot. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, appreciate your time.
Is that in the county or is that in the corporate limits?
It is.
One of your challenges, at least when I was a senator here, was the challenge is still getting that industrial and that commercial tax base up.
Right.
You know, agriculture and residential, we love having all those around, but they don't, you know, you can only share or pass along so much, but when you get an industrial or commercial base, you tend to be very productive there, so.
Right, the airport property is still within the city limits.
So the city would benefit too.
Yes, so be,
All right.
help them also. Yep.
Okay.
Great, thank you again.
We're gonna move on to recreation and culture, and our other Jeff is coming up. Jeff Wiggins. There you go. Grab Jeff's after this.
Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary, and thank you for coming to Carroll County. A couple things to share with you today, and actually the first one, I believe we have some good news. The Westminster Community Trail, this has been a joint project There are several sections that have already been completed by Carroll County at Carroll County's expense. This trail is located along Route 27 and then connecting into residential neighborhoods over to the Westminster Community Pond, and actually connects to the business park over there as well. So originally, the state was going to be completing the project from about where the old Carroll County Times building is out to Hahn Road. And then the county would be doing the trail from Hahn Road out to its duration. The county's portion has been completed. We started this project, started discussions with the state back in 2012. We've gone through the design phase. We are, I say we, I'll say the state is very close to the end of the design phase. We've been told it's in the queue for construction. However, until construction starts, we know how these things are still vulnerable. So we're very hopeful that it continues to move forward. I think they're in the final phases of design. Hopefully the bidding for construction will occur this winter, and then construction to start in the spring. And then the county will be maintaining the entire trail once it is completed. So we're not asking for money, but we're hoping.
How long's the whole trail?
The whole trail's a little bit over 2 miles. The section that the state would be completing is, I think, just under a mile, and the county's portion is a little bit over a mile that's been completed.
All right. Good. Have you had the, has the Secretary of Transport, they've come out for the CTP road show?
Yeah, next week.
We always call it the road show.
Next week, isn't it?
Yes, next week.
All right, good.
So hopefully we'll have good news for you shortly on that. The second item is repayment of past transfer tax redirections. And before I even go into that, I'd like to pass on our thanks on behalf of our recreation councils and our department for the full funding of program Open Space. That makes a huge difference with our capital budget. I know it's been a long time getting back to that point, so we're very appreciative.
And I'll tell you, the
of
governor has been very adamant and very focused on this. And then, you know, your ask is then, as we switch to the repayment portion, and try to make up for lost time there. And the governor's been, he's very proud of the fact that he's kept those commitments, but we're all frustrated that now we will make the commitments, but we have to go backwards and
right.
fulfill what was harvested before, let's put it that way. That's the kindest way to put it.
And we realize that's a great challenge. I think it's about $237 million between now and 2029. It's several $100,000s a year to Carroll County when you factor in the local portion and what would come to Carroll County. We have a couple of parks in particular, Krimgold Park in Woodbine and Leicester Park in Hampstead. They had the misfortune of starting right at the time when many of these funds were diverted. So they've been in development for well over 10 years. They are far from finished. And I'll give you an example. At Krimgold Park, you have a paved entrance road which takes you to some of the park's facilities, but you have gravel parking spaces on the side. There wasn't enough money to do all the paving. So we're going back in phases, adding additional paving, adding additional athletic fields or other features, lengthening walking trails. The repayment of these funds allows us to do that. And the full funding of program Open Space allows us to keep moving forward with the other existing capital projects.
Good.
So any support for that, we greatly appreciate. Charles Carroll Community Center, would you like me to defer to you on this one?
I'd love for you to defer.
Make sure to speak up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
She's not
She said
told
speak
that
up.
before.
She didn't say speak long. She said speak up.
We usually don't give you a microphone.
So you're in trouble now. So a little bit of background here, Mr. Secretary. This project is as a result of the closure of 3 of our schools here in Carroll County. And this was one of those that was a part of that. The school is gone. This was Charles Carroll Elementary School. It was demolished, and it's an empty lot. So to give back to that community was part of the healing process, if you will, because the school was sort of the glue that held that community together up there. and now that that's gone, if you get up past 97, past our sports complex, there's nothing. There's nothing up there. And you can go east or west as well, and you pretty much got nothing for that community to call their own. So my colleagues worked with me on this, and I want to applaud them for this. We put $3.5 million to build a Charles Carroll Community Center up there to replace that building. Kudos to our staff. The demolishing was done with a huge savings. We did that at about $400,000 or $500,000, which came in under what we thought it would be. So it's shovel ready now to put that building in. So we've got.
Do you have the plans and everything else for what's going to go?
Well, we're working on that, and I want to briefly tell you that we had conceptual plans that were done, brought together the community to get their input on what they wanted to see, because obviously, again, there's nothing up there. As a result of that, they're going to tweak the conceptual plan a little bit to add some things to it. So we've got about $2.8 million left to build that project. But one of the critical things that we have identified up there, and this is always very interesting because the statistics will not show this, technologically challenged up there. I've got a ton of people that have no internet, nor do they have access to internet. So as a result of that, the folks in the community said, could you please put some sort of a lab there, a technology lab or whatever, that we could allow our children to have access to the internet. So that's what we're attempting to do. But the building right now is consisting of about 2 or 3 multi-purpose rooms and a gymnasium. So we're going to include the recreation part of that too, the community center. But we've got a shortfall of about $1.5 million to put the tech lab in there, a warming kitchen for the community to be able to sell the chili dogs and whatever else at the events that they have up there, and an exercise fitness room, because there's no senior center up there too, and we've got a large population of seniors up there. So we're asking for help at the table of about $1.5 million to get us over the top with that project.
So that's the type of project that you also need to work very closely with the delegation on.
Which
which
I've already been bending
good.
their ears.
All right,
so.
good. So that, you know, we can figure out the scope of it. That way, whatever the requirements are, Terry Garrity is the person in my office who handles the capital projects. She handles capital programs. She has 14 analysts that work with her. And each one has a responsibility depending on the project, the scope of the project. Some handle colleges, universities, so, you know, when McDaniel has a certain need, there's a team that runs out and checks that out. So there is a set of criteria for that, and which is probably very similar to what you had with the Public Safety Center and all that stuff. But just so long as it's on the radar scope, they are very well versed in, from their experience, on what the reality and timing is, and therefore what's really needed. You've done a lot of the work ahead of time. Sometimes these things come in and say, we don't even have the land yet. You've got the land, the building's gone, you've taken care of any environmental remediation that needed to be done. So, you know, you're further along than typically they would see something like that. So
we'll get on that. As a matter of fact, I had Delegate Shoemaker at my last community meeting up there, so he could hear the passion in that community for the requests that they had. So he's very well versed in that as well.
Now, we haven't seen him since, right? You scared him. You
Yeah,
scared him a little bit up there.
There may have been a couple members that were holding him at gunpoint by
That's
the
it.
meeting.
Yeah, so there's that.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll certainly, that's very important for that, the northern part of our county, because again, there is just nothing there. They lost a ton when the school disappeared. So.
And while I mention that, I'll just say all of these asks and projects, you know, are certainly need to be kept very close with the delegation and whoever the new group of commissioners are too, you know, whatever that makeup is. and that communication just needs to
Okay.
continue forward.
Very good. All right,
Commissioner,
thank
if I may add one other item to that as well. You mentioned that we have the land, we have the planning process for this underway. We also have a history of use up there. We have a joint use agreement with the school system. When the school was still functioning, we had it was 2,400 usage hours up there on the athletic fields, in the cafeteria, and in the gymnasium. So we know that community will use a building. There's a need for it. We travel a great distance to get there. And I think that also comes into play when we look at the justification for this. This isn't a new service. This is trying to continue to provide what was provided for years.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Right.
Union Mills Homestead?
You didn't know you were,
But I can address it.
yeah, you didn't know you were part 5.
No, no.
This is probably more public works.
Yes,
Yeah,
I
this is
think it is.
Do you want Jeff come back, or do you know about Union Mills?
Touch briefly on it.
Okay,
All right.
wrong Jeff, sir.
We'll continue swapping the Jeff
We
plates.
do have more Jeffs, so to speak.
We've acquired some funding before for this, for Union Mills. You've probably been there.
I've been there many a time,
Yeah.
many a time.
Were you ever to the corn roast up there?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I know you've been there, so, you know, one of the
Yeah.
last working grist mills, probably on the East Coast, and maybe, I don't know, beyond that.
We're in Virginia.
So,
Okay, that's it.
yeah, so
I
this
think it
is,
was designed by the same guy too, the one in Virginia.
so a critically important project to maintain the buildings up there, because, with the age, they're starting to, you know, little by little deteriorate, so we're attempting to try to get some additional funding.
Well,
Doug, you've been
I was gonna
tough.
say, it's an important historic site, obviously.
Right.
It's heritage there, but it's interesting the number of field trips and visits they get for folks on the STEM side of things, looking at how, you know, how the inner workings of the mechanics of it actually are. So it's get kind of a nice balance of things. But
Right. Mr. Secretary, I'll just I'll touch briefly just on, you know, both properties, and, you know, as our commissioners stated, I mean, both properties are visited by all the school systems, both private and public, field trips, 4-H events. They're just, both sites are just, you know, just great for the community.
You're bringing in the farm museum.
Yes, yes.
Farm Museum and
Yep.
Union Mills are.
Right, so both, yeah, so both Union Mills and Farm Museum, as with both of these sites, one of the challenges that we have with facilities, and even building construction, any project that we do, these sites are registered in National Historic Society. And every project, you know, we have to be very specific on our construction process and the materials that we use. We just recently, just trying to put, you know, change some cedar shingles over there at Union Mills, and that was probably about a 3-month process back and forth with everybody to get the right approval to make sure that it is historically correct. So with both these sites, I mean, as you see, you know, over at Union Mills Homestead, we have a project of about $350,000, and over at the Farm Museum, about $1.4 million for the renovations to both these historic sites. And any assistance that we could get, again, the challenges that we do have, I mean, these are just current prices that we have today. But as you know, as you would, you know, as you know, as you're trying to source these materials and the proper contractors to be able to perform the work, it becomes very limited. And then at that point, you have a specialized talent by the, you know, specialized contractors and the talents that they have to put through these projects. So again, knowing the how much both these properties are utilized and significance they are to Carroll County, we really would, anything that you could do to help assist in these projects would be greatly appreciated.
Okay. And I might add, Saturday is the Fall Fest at the Farm Museum, so if you're not busy, you may want to bring the fountain.
Door knocking. Get my boss reelected.
You can tour the buildings yourself and see what the issues are, but commercial
Yeah.
message.
All right, good.
Just want to, a couple of things. First of all, I wanted to thank you for the partnership over the years. You were a senator when I first came on board as commissioner. I don't know if you remember, probably had lots of meetings, but I remember in our very first meeting, forget what the actual issue was. You left me with the words to either lead, follow, or get out of the way.
I did.
Yeah, you remember
Yeah.
that? So I hope, after 8 years, it came down on the side of lead, but I will say also the extraordinary partnership, not only the delegation, but this administration has been like night and day. I mean, it has just been phenomenal for us to be able to try to do the things that we need to do locally, knowing that even when we can't always get everything that we want, or there's lots of competition for things, that the dialogue is excellent, the support is very good, the interworking with the staff back and forth is extraordinary, and it's just very helpful. I do want to just throw out two things. They're not projects per se, they're things I know very much you're well aware of, but things that we just always got to kind of beat the drum on a little bit. One, of course, is education funding. We're still hugely challenged. We know the Kerwin Commission and lots of other discussions are going on. Our enrollment's leveled off. We're getting a little bit of relief in that regard, but we just want to kind of keep it out there that it's still a huge challenge. Our fixed costs are high. We just had a redistricting committee that came back with a decision not to close or redistrict anything, so our fixed costs look like they're going to stay there for a little while. And at the end of the day, we just want to keep that on the radar, I guess, financially, not that that's any surprise. The other one is really the Warfield complex. This year marked finally getting it over the finish line to where it's in the hands of a private developer. I know the governor was just up about a month ago. Again, it was an extraordinary partnership with the Department of Commerce, but we're still looking for ways to rehabilitate those buildings in a way that gets them more in line with market, recognizing that probably as opposed to some other facilities where there was significant cost to get them closed down, that cost just kind of moved along with the project, and now we're kind of out of whack in terms of what it takes to bring a building online. So we've had a lot of support from Secretary Gill and his team. We've had a lot of discussion with MHT, but in both cases, if it's not about more funding, we're always looking for ways where we can maybe even get some relief from some regulation as well. I know it's important to make sure that we keep the integrity of those historic buildings, but we also know that sometimes there are some cost-effective ways to keep the look and the feel and that kind of thing, but to be able to make it more economical for the developer. And the same thing with education. If it can't be money, I know last year Senator Reedy introduced a bill that said, if funding levels for the state and the county were disparate enough that the county was picking up a certain amount, and maybe there's certain things that we could get some relief from being able to, from having to do. So I just kind of keep that out there as a thought, whether it's more from money or a little bit of relief on the other end. Mm-hmm. We're fighting that same balancing act. But I will say in all those areas, as important as they are, I think the partnership has been excellent, and we feel like we've been able to do a lot of what we needed to do. And so we'll also be out Saturday making sure your boss gets reelected.
Well, on the Warfield thing, there's I met the developer of that in Ocean City and Mako, and ironically, I was sitting alone having dinner. He was sitting alone having dinner next to me, and
well, if that's not
we met. I mean, it was like, but the part that you reference about getting some regulatory relief because you have some historic buildings, they're old buildings, they're big buildings, but there has to be a crossover point where reasonableness touches economic reality, because otherwise it continues into the concept we hear more in municipalities as opposed to at a county meeting, but the concept of demolition by neglect. Mm-hmm. If someone can't do something to it, eventually it reaches the point of no return, and then you have nothing to pass forward to future generations. So that's certainly one aspect there. The Kerwin Commission, I sit on the Kerwin Commission. For the first time, I'd say Wednesday, we saw at about 4 o'clock in the evening, supposed to end at 5, we saw the meat of what Department of Legislative Services is now thinking about in moving forward. That was the one part of the Kerwin Commission, in my opinion, that was legislatively mandated. We've spent 3 years having conversations about things that people would like to have done and perhaps should be done, but the parts that statutorily required, this was the aspect, and it is the aspect that directly affects Carroll County. It's the part that the delegation, Delegate Krebs was very much on top of it. I know Senator Reedy was. in trying to accommodate the decreased enrollment and everything that went into harming some of that. So the proposal that they put forth, and it's public record now, basically I think kept the income tax computations identical to what they are now, Susan, with the November dates, because there had to be legislation taking it from September to November, and then it became optional, and then it became mandatory, and now we're keeping that part of it, but they're making an adjustment on the wealth calculation criterion, which is the part that hurt you, along with, you know, enrollment. And then looking at, instead of a drop-off, trying to accommodate a 3-year averaging as you have those changes. When you see the document, Susan, it's like 35 pages of just spreadsheets, and, you know, a lot of the people that were very technically competent were getting bleary-eyed looking at it. But so they have yet to cost out what all of the work groups were putting together. That is their mission. In the next 6 weeks. They have to cost all this out. And again, that's the product of 3 years worth of work. So we'll see what that goes to. Steve Guthrie was a part of that, you know, until you know, that change occurred, and so he was certainly intricately involved in what was going on. So we're very much aware, and the governor, you know, came to the forefront on addressing some of those education financing concerns. And if nothing else, it's a Band-Aid until we figure out what the new funding mechanism going forward has to be. And then the community college aspect that Delegate Krebs also worked on and brought to our attention. That, you know, some of these things were very key that helped certain areas, but again, you'll need to work very closely with the delegation, because honestly, that's who we have to pick up the phone and talk to when we're dealing at the committee level or back and forth in our conversations. And but you know, I'm happy to come out and have whatever conversations I can be, because like you say, this is part of God's country with Western Maryland.
I just want to mention, I know you met Wednesday and had this meeting, at the very last minute you got this document, but today, and you got, I guess you all get the Mako newsletter online from Penwood Street. Well, I read it today briefly, and it's not good for us from what they put out there. It was just a few pages they had, so I suggest all of you read it. And what I'm trying to find out from our school board and from everybody, you know, the devil is in the details on these formulas, but some of the pages that they posted does not look favorable to Carroll County. It shows us actually getting a reduction. So what I guess I'm trying to find out is what can we advocate for in the formula, in the wealth calculations. I mean, we need to know what to advocate for. And I mean, I know Steve Guthrie sat on the commission, and before he left, in fact, I'm going to try to meet with him in Delaware just to pick his brain, but before he left, he pretty much did not have an answer either. And maybe you do. Like, what can we do?
We don't have an answer yet, because right now what that was a scenario, a hypothetical. If you adopted this change, this is what it would look like. But there are many other moving parts to the whole concept besides money. Money is the common denominator that everybody can talk about, hence the definition currency. In this instance, the currency is dollars. But the other thing that is we are all anxiously trying to wrap our arms around is, what is accountability going to look like? And the governor is very focused on accountability, particularly in light of incidents that have happened in Prince George's County, Baltimore City, and Howard County. So when Thornton, and if I'm telling you things you already know, I'm sorry, but here goes. When Thornton was passed, and I was down there, we put $2.1 billion into K-12 education, the state did. In the last budget that we passed, that number's at $6.5 billion. So there's been a tripling of that. And now what we're trying to find out is, you know, what exactly are we doing with some of the resources? What are we getting with the resources? And interestingly, some of the parts of the report that came about are not being talked about or written about. And that is that the consultant, when he first came in and laid out a report, he said, look, chances are, if you adopt some of the recommendations we have here, it's going to cost more money. So that's the second question is, where's that money coming from? And this is what people are choosing to ignore. Part of what he also said is some of the programs you have aren't working. You are already putting money into those programs and you just need to redirect it. That's not something they want to hear. So the reality is, I think that the legislators know that. I know that the staff knows that. And so, again, we'll have to see what the legislature comes up with as their solution in moving forward with it. The governor is very committed to ensuring that all kids have an opportunity for an excellent education throughout the state. He is, I guess this goes to the part of the accountability, is that we have professionals in place to deal with ensuring that we get some of these results, and honestly, some of them aren't doing their jobs. Now, some of them aren't doing their jobs for various reasons. It could be some are scared to do their job, some have, don't have some flexibility to do their job. I don't know. But the sad fact is that American students, Maryland's students, are being left behind the production of and the opportunities that other students throughout the world have. And so we have to take our current structure, see what we can tweak to it, but it's giving everybody the opportunity to be successful as they go forward. And we won't see the results for this probably for decades. So Kirwan has very lofty goals, but we also put an awful lot of resources into it, and we want to, our mission is to ensure that the professionals delivering the services are adequately compensated and taken care of, but that the students are also prepared. One of the conversations taking place was that we have spent decades preparing students for college education, when in reality we have a shortfall when it comes to trades. And not everybody, wants to go to college and may not have whatever skills are needed for college and continue to do research. And the governor makes this point that he has a college-educated daughter, I think, who's a lawyer, and I think her husband is a plumber or something like that. And the plumber makes more money than the governor. So we have to acknowledge that there's a new reality coming forward. What are we doing to prepare our youth for the future? And I'm not certain necessarily that Kirwan is certainly looking at all this, but then we have to look at it in the confines of what we can reasonably do. And the governor is very focused on ensuring that we have high measures of success when it comes to this. So that's my Kirwan opinion. The other aspect when it comes to the state's budget. When we adjourned back in April, we had what was projected to be a $940 million gap as we prepare our 2020 fiscal year budget. The public has heard of two significant changes to that, and they've all been good news, great news. The first one was at the closeout. When we closed out 2018's budget, we ended up with an extra $500 million, $500 million. And that was due principally to a lot of the management of the administration's team, the cabinet secretaries, and their diligence in staying on top of their departments. We received a tremendous amount of reversions back of monies that hadn't been used. We still have some challenges in going forward. The second piece of good news came in September when we had a new revenue update and revenues were written up significantly to the point that that $940 million, while it didn't go away, it certainly made the task of dealing with the 2020 budget more palatable, I guess is the best way to put it. However, this is what the public has not paid attention to. Both of those bits of news did nothing to the structural gap we still have going forward. And as we prepare the 2021 budget, or the 22 budget, or the 23 budget. We're looking at nearly a $2 billion gap, and the issue has to deal with mandates that we're required to fulfill without the revenue coming in. In this year, our increased spending went up nearly 9%, staggering sum of money. We had new revenues of 3%. Well, if you all were getting 3% new revenues, that's great news. We're projecting 3.5% in new revenues going forward. That's great news. But our average on our increased expenses in the outgoing years is 5%. And my Frederick County Public School math says that dog don't hunt. We can't continue to have that delta, and therefore we are aggressively managing our way through it. Here's the other cautionary note when it comes to all this, is all of that presumes the economy keeps chugging. And one little plateau or hiccup runs those numbers in the wrong direction even further. So I am advising, and my team is advising the governor to be very defensive, because when we get a turnaround or a hiccup, our mission is to ensure that the state can more than adequately absorb it so that there's not an interruption of services. And that's our challenge going forward. And particularly as we deal with a new legislature, you have a new group of commissioners. But we have some very sharp professional individuals that are taking a very conservative watch on our estimates and on where we're putting our monies to make sure that we do this prudently. The governor is very focused on making sure that the state is managed very soundly when it comes to our finances.
I think the state's paralleling exactly where we are in this. I mean, we're in the same situation. Many times expenses are escalating faster than our revenue coming in. We're going to be in the same type accountable situation.
Ed, you didn't like to hear that, did you?
Ted doesn't like the competition when it comes to doom and gloom. He has kind of a lock on those kinds of conversations in our building.
I just have to weigh in a little bit on that. Just want to point out that we do balance 6 years of budgets every time we adopt a budget. So we might have challenges from rising expenditures, but we have 6 years where we've said we believe we have the revenues to cover our expenditures.
Keeps us well alive.
So 3% increase in the state would be a big one.
Yeah, we just need to get rid of that 5% increase.
I think your point about it's as much about stopping stopping the things that aren't working as much as it is funding additional things.
So reevaluating.
Yeah.
Look, we got some programs in place. It's not just education. There's a lot of things that we've been very good about identifying some of these and trying to be corrective on. Say we don't need that service, perhaps to the extent that we have it or had it. But here's something new. You brought up something here, which is internet access. 2 decades ago, people weren't talking about that. Now we're very focused on internet access to rural areas, the rural broadband program, and it's to the context that provides some modicum of opportunity for people to just get online and be able to communicate and exchange commerce.
I want to thank you for coming out here today. I have to say I've only been in commission for 4 years, so I don't know Commissioner Howard's other 4 years, but the access to the governor and his cabinet and secretary has been tremendous in the time I've been here.
It wasn't always
right.
like that.
I believe I've heard that. I was a city councilman for Westminster, going down to MML before this, and I don't remember seeing any of the former administration's people down there to help us out. So this is tremendous. And the fact is that a few times, but I have to call it down to Annapolis and talk to, and I get immediate response. People come back, this is what we can do, how can we help you? I really appreciate that. One of the things I do want to say that of these things that we pointed out here today, because you asked what are we putting into them, we're going to move forward with these because we have to. Any additional state funding from you would be greatly appreciated, and if you can help in one area, it frees up some money for us to put it in another area. So whatever help you can give Carroll County, very appreciative of, and will help us, of course, with our budget and so forth. And we really do appreciate everything that you've done for us.
And I'll tell you, I have received correspondence from the delegation about Dove House, right? So we have a capital request in for, Dove House program and for a project out there. So, but that's key that Terry Garrity in my office get that. She works out of Baltimore. I'm principally out of Annapolis, and that's where my operating team is. The capital budget team is in Baltimore.
So for the sake of giving you this letter, is there anything else that we need to do to move any of these forward with more information? Or will you, this is the ask versus a letter. Is there anything else?
Well, part of the thing that I need to take back to Nick, this is where Nick Peppersack, who works in my office, I hand it to him and I say, all right, Nick, start exploring, what are the potential sources. Getting all of them isn't going to happen. But as you just said, if you get a part of it, then that can help you free up some other aspects to it. The other thing, which isn't even on here, but it's kind of an elephant in the room, is what is going to happen with the Kirwan recommendations. And not only what's going to happen with it, but when's it going to happen. Because part of the conversation, Delegate, was that we've made several different tweaks to the law, one of which benefited Carroll County. That was the fill in the gap. But the expectation is and they refer to those as add-ons to the existing Thornton aspect, is that all those will go away. But theoretically, the symptoms that those were crafted to address will be incorporated in the new formula moving forward.
We expect that.
Yeah.
That's a 3-year fix.
Yeah.
I just want to mention, for the drug enforcement and treatment, we've had Glenn Houston out. We have a senior policy opioid group, and Commissioner Watson's on it. Commissioner Fraser's been there. Commissioner Howard's been there. But staff has been out many times. Clay Stamp's been out. But Glenn Houston was out last month. We meet, times a year or something. And we basically gave him the ask of these different things, and commissioners have $300,000 out there. So we have had him out there, and we gave him our specific, this is the projects we're looking for. So he's looking through some of that $10 million these grants to try to see what he can accelerate for Carroll County. So we've been trying to work it from many angles.
Yeah, when we originally proposed that, when the governor proposed it, we submitted it as a supplemental budget, so it happened in March. At the time, the conference committees were ongoing, and this was such a new concept. What the governor's intent was, look, whatever we're doing, which is not unique to Maryland, whatever everybody's doing, isn't working. But we do know that we need resources to tackle this problem. So he allocated the $10 million times 5, over 5 years. And we put it in the military department because we wanted, well, actually we put it in MEMA, Maryland Emergency Management Agency, so that MEMA would have some discretion, which happens to be under the military department. And I'll never forget sitting at the conference table, because I'm supposed to be quiet. I'm an observer for the governor. And the Senate sat on this side, and the House sits on this side, and the chief person at Department of Legislative Services sat at the table, and he said, so what are you going to do with $10 million in the military department? Buy more Humvees and guns? And I had to interrupt and say, stop. I get, perhaps you're trying to make something comical, but the fact is it's a very serious problem, and we're trying to put it in MEMA so that we have the most flexibility, because what works in Garrett County won't work in Carroll County, won't work in Ocean City, won't work in Ocean City in the summertime versus the wintertime because their population shift, and it certainly won't work in Montgomery, Baltimore City, or Anne Arundel. And we're looking for flexibility. We're looking to find out from the communities, what is it that they see that they need that can help them? In some area it might be transportation. In another area where there's lots of transportation, it might be just more centers. And allow that flexibility so that we truly can get ahead of the problem. And the solution that was decided at that table was to look directly through the health department, but allow Clay through MEMA to help dictate and direct based on the feedback that we got.
Well, really following that lead, we're trying to do the same thing with our local agencies too. Trying to take blocks of senior opioid group is a good example. We know there's an amount of resource that we want to put there. We want you to be creative. We need you to come up with things that are very unique to the agencies you're in. We had them in yesterday for about $115,000. One wanted a van, one wanted a pro. It's like, whatever these things piece together, but to give you the best arms and legs on the ground, so I think it's a great approach, and we certainly appreciate it as well. I'm also going to go ahead and give you the proclamation. If it turns out the governor needs Commissioner Rothschild's autograph, we can make arrangements for that to happen.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I guess that concludes our meeting.
All right. Any motions or not? We're good?
No, we
You didn't? Okay.
have a motion to start it.
Very good.
Great working with you.
I'll see you around.
Absolutely.